Hello there. Why I no longer pluralize my variables. It's such an odd topic, but I feel compelled to share my viewpoint on this. For the longest time, I pluralized my variables to indicate multiples of something. By pluralizing, I can ensure that my code reads like well-written prose. Therefore, when I write code like this, it reads almost like English. However, over the years, I have become increasingly convinced pluralizing is the wrong way to name a variable. Long ago, I read once that on the internet that English is not a language. It's three languages wearing a trench coat pretending to be one. As a result, English has many inconsistencies, including how plurals are handled. For example, fish doesn't have a plural form. Scissors doesn't have a singular form. Singular form of bacteria is bacterium, but for criteria is criterion. So how do we typically handle these inconsistencies in code? The most straightforward way is to force pluralize and move on. Like I said, the code reads almost like English. Though the real question is, why isn't the plural form of fish fishes? Food for thought. Let's talk about person now. I assumed the only plural form of person is people. However, this elevator taught me that persons is equally valid. As I dug a little deeper, I found that it was proposed that we use persons if you're using a person as a countable noun, and people if you're using it as an uncountable noun. Nowadays, persons are mostly used in legal contexts when deliberately referring to humans individually rather than collectively. Personally, I feel persons is the correct pluralization in a coding context. By the way, I'm not suggesting we should start using collective nouns. Murder may be a perfectly acceptable way to describe crows in literature. Using it in code will incite it. Instead, I decided to look at it as describing a single object versus a collection of objects. A collection properly encapsulates multiples of anything without the nuances of pluralization. So you no longer have to call a collection of fishes in your code. Personally, I just use list instead, since it's shorter and gets the job done for me. Isn't this simply adding type to variable names? In Java, a collection is an interface that describes a generic group of items, while a list describes an ordered group of items. In cases like this, appending a list or collection at the end may feel like adding type information to the variable, but I would argue that is not the case. Firstly, the rule came about to retire Hungarian notation. The Hungarian notation was first introduced when types were not a thing, and you were responsible for knowing how many bytes a variable is supposed to take. Prefixing b for a single byte variable and sz for zero terminated strings greatly help keep your memory safe. With the advent of modern programming where types are first-class citizens, you no longer need to prefix your variables. Secondly, primitive types are different from reference types, and we use reference types in variable names all the time. If the first line is correct, then the second line is equally correct. What we don't want to see is this. Calling the variable Boolean doesn't add much value here. But wait a second. What about collection of collections? That too is possible. Let's say you're building the next generation AI-powered SaaS for a jewelry store, and they typically have collections. Unfortunately, our code might end up looking something like this. If I'm being honest, pluralizing would have been better here. So, what would unbin do? I would stick to collection naming convention for consistency. There is no perfect code, only compromises. Does it really matter? Honestly, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter if you choose to use pluralization or not. The occasional workaround for pluralization quirk may be rare occurrences in the first place. So while I strongly prefer non-pluralized variable name, this is not the hill I wish to die upon. For instance, even in YoPrint, we continue using pluralization for our database table names. Since we started with pluralization, we decided to keep going with it for the sake of consistency. If I were to start over, I would just use a singular name for the database table name instead. At the end of the day, I'm fully aware that I might be alone in this preference. I love the simplicity, uniformity, and clarity the non-pluralized naming convention provides. Though I'm certain that from this point onwards, there aren't many fishes in my sea. If you have something you're curious about and want to know more, please leave a comment and I'll do my best to cover it in this channel. With that said, thank you for watching and I'll see you on the next video.